I'm horror author Paul Edwards. Tonight I'm watching The Return of Chandu from 1934, starring Bela Lugosi. Who do you think was the first superhero? The general public probably would answer Superman. He was a very early superhero, and he was certainly the format a lot of other superheroes were based on. But there were characters before Superman who had superheroic qualities. One of them was Mandrake the Magician. Mandrake premiered in 1934 in print, beating Superman by a couple of years, and quickly made the transition to the silver screen. But even before Mandrake the Magician, there was Chandu the Magician. Chandu premiered in 1931 as a radio character, and soon afterwards made the transition to print and to the silver screen. Chandu was an American-born man named Frank Chandler who traveled abroad and spent years in the Far East learning the secrets of mysticism. And when he returned to the United States, he had special magical powers that he now could use to fight the force of evil. Known as Chandu the Magician, based on his name, Frank Chandler, Chandu would fight against gangsters and criminals, and often against enemies who themselves also had magical powers. The character of Chandu had a feature film, Chandu the Magician, and the film was pretty popular. The character on the radio was very popular. And so to follow up on the feature film, there was a movie serial produced, The Return of Chandu. Bela Lugosi, who had played the villain, the bad guy in the feature film, Chandu the Magician, got cast now as the hero, Chandu. And for once, Bela Lugosi got to play the good guy. And in this adventure, he used his magical powers to protect his love interest, Egyptian Princess Naja, who had been kidnapped by an evil cult who wanted to sacrifice her because of her lineage. They wanted to sacrifice her to their cat god. And so they abducted her and took her away to the far-off magical island of Lemuria. So the premise of the movie is that Chandu had to follow to Lemuria and overcome the traps and dangers on this strange island and ultimately rescue the princess from her captors. One real drawback here, though, and I don't just mean for Chandu, I mean story-wise, is that Chandu could not access his magical powers while he was on this island. This certainly succeeded in making his mission a lot harder, but it also sort of defeated the purpose of what we were watching for in the first place. If I tell you that there's going to be a story where a good magician has to fight against an evil magician, you're going to expect that you're going to see a war between these two magicians, and they're going to, use magical powers against each other. That's what you're paying to see. So the fact that they strip away Chandu's magical powers while he's on Lemuria is a real detriment to the story that they're telling us here. It's not only a detriment to the character, it's a detriment to the story. I think the story would have worked a little better if they took away his powers. They could take away his powers for a little bit and then have him get them back. That would be fine. That's been done in countless Superman stories, and it works. But you can't deprive the character of their superpowers for too long, or what are we even watching for? On the other hand, there are some good aspects to this serial. Of course, Bela Lugosi is great in everything that he does. He's memorable. And it is nice to see Bela Lugosi playing the good guy for a change. Oddly, in a franchise where he had previously played the villain. And the story itself moves along as a typical adventure serial would move, with, death traps and plenty of cliffhangers. A lot of the chapters ended at cliffhangers. Interestingly, though, if you decide that you're going to watch this serial, or if you have seen it, let me call your attention to something. Out of the 12 chapters, chapter 4 does not end with a cliffhanger. It ends with an apparent resolution to the whole story. And then in chapter 5, you find out there's a whole lot more that's going to happen. But there was a reason why they did this. The studio felt that they could release this production as a 12-part movie serial, or alternatively, they could release just the first 4 chapters as a feature film, a standalone production, and it would have a story, a beginning, middle, and end, and it would end where chapter 4 ends. And it could be a feature film, and then if people liked it, then they could market the remaining 8 chapters as a follow-up serial. So they were thinking ahead when they produced this, and it was in some ways cunning. In some ways you might think a little cynical, that they were already thinking about, producing a sequel to something they hadn't even released yet. Sort of like they did with Back to the Future 2 and 3. But if you have that in mind and you watch the serial and you watch it chapters 1 through 4 and you just stop there, it is a complete story. And then if you go on, that's actually where some more of the interesting adventure happens. Not necessarily the best scenes for Chandu himself, but there's a lot of chase scenes, death traps, sneaking around in the catacombs of the lost civilization, that sort of thing. And it's definitely worth viewing. Now, the character of Chandu predated Mandrake the Magician, and I know that a lot of comics historians have said that they think Mandrake the Magician is the first superhero. But really, Chandu came first, so you could argue that Chandu was really the first superhero. The one caveat is that he didn't appear in print before Mandrake did. Chandu started out on the radio. And if you're going to go by that standard, if you're going to allow radio characters to count as superheroes, then you have to pass the title further back to The Shadow, because The Shadow actually started in 1930. So, there. Now you can sound smart when your comic friends who know most of the comics world better than you do start talking about the history of comics. You can say, well, actually, it wasn't Mandrake the Magician. It was Chandu, or The Shadow. All right. Well, my forte is not comics history. My forte is horror films. And if you've ever seen any of my videos before, you know that I'm self-published on Amazon. I have a series of horror novels, the Mourner's Woods books. They're a series of stories set in a haunted forest. And each book has a completely new cast of characters encounter supernatural threats. I've got a ghost one, I've got a zombie one, I've got a swamp monster one, a giant spider one. And I recapture the vibe and the feel of 20th century horror films, but of course in printed form and set in a contemporary setting. So check them out. I put the link to the Mourner's Woods books in the description of all my videos. My name again is Paul Edwards. My books are the Mourner's Woods books. Thanks for letting me talk to you a little about Chandu and his return in the form of Bela Lugosi. I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.